So my name is Toby Tompkins. I'm African American. I live in Harlem. I'm 58 years old, and I used to live in Ghana. I lived and worked in Ghana for 2 years, about 10 years ago. I woke up one morning in about 2006. I literally woke up out of my bed and said, I want to move to Africa. And it took me 2 years to get there. But I wanted to have that experience in life. I've lived and worked in many places and traveled, but I wanted to have the experience. My goal and ultimate first opportunity was to move to Cape Town, to South Africa. And I had a job opportunity there. I was a consultant. I do leadership development work. And so I was going to work with some young leaders in Cape Town. And then I became ill and was bedridden for a year while I recovered, and was told I wouldn't be able to move, much less fly. And then a phone call came from a friend of mine who said there's a project that the US government is operating in Ghana, and the leader of it has become ill and they need someone to take over the project. Would you be interested? And I had never really thought about Ghana as a place to go. I mean, first thing I thought to myself is, wow, that's like real Africa, that's not South Africa. So I went in, I interviewed, and they made me an offer the same day I interviewed for the job. And then the next thing I knew, within 30 days, I was arriving in Accra. I had never set foot in Africa, or much less in Accra or Ghana, ever before. And I packed up and moved there sight unseen. When I came through the airport, it was early morning. You know, it was because I took a red eye from New York, and I arrived in Accra at the airport. And I came out the gate, and you know, everybody was there, people waiting for the whole families go to the airport, and everybody, for as far as I could see, was black. And I don't mean, you know, I mean, I'm a black man, I'm dark. They were darker like me. I saw blackness in forms, in features that I had never seen. I didn't know black people looked the way I've seen black people. You know, I don't know if that even makes sense. Like, you don't know it if you're there, and you don't know it if you're here. But when you leave here and you go there, you see that the diversity of what it means to be black is so broad in ways that we don't understand. You know what I mean, right? Like, it's just crazy. My whole body was tingling. And I remembered thinking to myself, because my mother had passed away, if she could be with me, you know what I mean? Like, that day, like if that was a trip I could have taken with her, like what it would have meant for her and I to be there together. That was the first moment I had. And it just was amazing. It was just an amazing experience. And you know, I got in the cab, I started talking immediately to the cab driver, and I don't do that in New York. I'm like, I'm going here. Take me here, that's it. I don't want to talk. But there, I couldn't stop talking. You know, I just couldn't ask questions, and people were engaging, and it was just an incredible experience. And in some ways, a very difficult experience, because I also saw how, you know, people talk about what's been taken from Africa, but the most important thing about the African continent are the people. It's the young people who are doing incredible things, and I would see that there, like almost immediately, who don't have a lot. I mean, in the US, we throw away everything. And in Ghana, they throw away nothing. Like, no, they fix things. I'm like, what do you mean you don't fix it? Oh, they fix it. That's so different. There, this is here. I can't explain it. It was incredible. It was a really, really, really incredible experience for me. And one that I want for every black person. I really do. You changed me, for the better. You know, it made me more compassionate and more sensitive and more patient and more proud to be who I am. You know, because my story stops where the big story of slavery begins, and that's not the case any longer. It's happiness in that what you're asking me to do really is comparing apples to oranges, because what we believe happiness is in the US I think we're learning is false, because we know too many people, particularly black people in this country, who achieve all of the things that we think will make us happy: success, money, wealth, fame. And the moment they appear to have all of those things, they explode, they fall, and they embarrass and shame themselves and others. We have so many examples of that in this country. And yet you think to yourself, well, they should have been so happy. They had everything. How did they lose it? Or you see their families fall apart, or they go through divorce after divorce after divorce. What I learned in Ghana is that happiness comes from a different place, and that it's not dependent upon what you have in that sort of material way. It's dependent on who you have. And one of the biggest differences, I think, in all of Africa, but my experience in Ghana and in the US, is the structure of family. So in the US, we have nuclear family. We have a mother or a father. We don't really even have that anymore. We have a mama and a child. You know, most people are growing up in single parent households. And I know that's happening more across Africa too. But your relatives, your family, are the people who share your bloodline, and those are often weak connections. In Ghana, you know, I love the phrase in Africa that it takes a village, and so everybody is your family, you're connected, you know, and I've seen that in the Caribbean as well. And so it's just, you know, it's a different sort of understanding. I don't know if that makes sense. And I never understood that until I got to know how people live in Ghana and what it takes to be happy as a black person in the world. True, I did interact with kids, actually, because the people on my team and the people who worked for me all had families, and so what I would observe is that the younger children were very respectful. You know, I know this for a lot of kids. The first thing you have to realize that's different for an African American is that in Ghana, when I lived in Ghana, I was, for the first time ever in my life, in a black country. And I had no concept of what that meant, that I could get lost in the crowd, that everybody looked at. Usually I grow up in America being the only black person in the room, so everybody looks at me and knows where I am and that I was there. In Ghana, that's what it's like to be white. And so that is a big difference. But what I saw in Ghana were children who were raised often in a very religious, you know, framework. So they had that as a framework. But they were raised also with kids to play, because kids today in the US, they play with their technology, they don't play with each other. But in Ghana, you know, in part, depending on where, every child doesn't have a cell phone or an iPad or a Xbox. I mean, those are not things that every child has. And if one child has it, then lots of children have the opportunity to experience it. So there's just a way in which I think learning how to be in community is something that the children there learn. Do you know what I mean? In a way that we don't learn here. But they're kids, right? Kids are kids. They're, you know, and they pretty much act the same. But the consequences are different too. And I think that's the other thing. You know, a young black child in America has to fear for his life from the moment he leaves the house and goes to school. Every single day, anything could happen to him. I don't think that's a concept that a young black child in Ghana understands in the same way. It took me a while. I wasn't the kind of person that went to Africa and wanted to get off the plane and kiss the ground and learn my Ghanaian name and, you know, having a Dinkra symbol tattooed on my arm. That was not me. I didn't have that kind of romance. But the more I was there, Africa got under my skin, you know, and like the food was so easy for me to just, the first time I had Shito sauce, oh my God. You know, it was like my mouth had been looking for that my whole life. And And I go to other countries, and I've traveled all around the world, and I've tried out many different cuisines, and they feel foreign, if you know what I mean. But the food in Ghana didn't feel that, it didn't taste, my body didn't react to it as something that was unfamiliar. It was something that was very familiar. The familiarity of the people, so you would see people and you think that, not that you recognize them, but that you know them, that somehow they're in your family's tree, that they look like your cousin's cousin, your second or third cousin, and they have the same reaction to you, and yet you know when you talk that you don't know them, that you know, and then that would happen a lot, and that was really bizarre, and that's never happened to me in any other part of Africa except West Africa, and that was long before I had my DNA tested and learned that I am part Ghanaian from my, in some place in my ancestry. So I think the Africans in the diaspora not only have a responsibility to return and understand what it means to be the African part. Like, there's a reason that we're African-American. And I think that real lesson happens for those of us who are fortunate enough to return. What I learned from not only living in Ghana but traveling around Africa is that, in the US we talk about it in terms of racism, but in Africa it's colonialism and it's post-colonial thinking and identity. But the fact is that oppression between people of different races, or oppression of melanin-rich people, is a virus that lives all over the world. It has been exported everywhere. Wherever you see black people living alongside other people, even if they are within the same culture, the message is that if you are black, if your skin is rich in melanin, even if you don't identify that as black, that somehow you are the worthy subject of oppression, of exclusion. You're the one that must be treated, served, seen last. We don't get to change that as black people until we go to continents and engage and interact with other black people. When I was in India, traveling with my white colleagues at a very prominent foundation, right? And I'm there at the same level in the same role as they are. But the Indian people, the fair-complected Indian people, would come in and talk to the white women, my colleagues. They would ignore me. They treated me like I was the driver walking in with them. And I don't even look Indian. But so I thought, until we went to the local market and I saw the Dalits, the black people in India. And what happened there? They came running to me, welcoming me. They saw me and smiled. So, I realized that this condition that we have, which is a beautiful and fortunate thing to have, right? Or else we wouldn't rely upon it so much to elevate the experience of people who don't have it. Bears with it a great responsibility, to acknowledge each other no matter where we are in the world. The one thing that happens repeatedly, and to this day I'll never forget, is that when I first moved to Ghana, and all throughout my time there, and it happened in different ways, I would be in the supermarket and I would see a person at the mall, and they looked so familiar to me, not like I had met them someplace before, but that I was connected to them. They looked like a cousin. In my family, we all look similar, so I may not know you, but I know that I'm gonna ask you, well, whose child are you? You're my cousin, second or third time removed. I was having that experience a lot in Ghana, and I would think that I was like, I know this person, and I would walk up to, and they would be looking at me with the same sort of curiosity, but the moment we would talk, I would talk with an American accent, they would talk with a Ghanaian accent, and we would immediately know that obviously we don't know each other, but we would acknowledge that we felt the same sort of draw to each other. And at first I thought that was just coincidental, or Ghanaians being nice people because they're very nice and polite people. But then I met the president at the time, who was His Excellency Kufuor. And I went to his house, and a friend of mine encouraged me to get a proper Ghanaian, outfit. So it was the first time I had worn local Ghanaian clothing. I had an outfit made, and I'm there, and I'm standing in the receiving line, and he walks up to me, and we greet, and he says hello, and I say hello, and I introduce myself, and he stops, and he goes, "Wait, like, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Delaware. I grew up in Delaware." And he says, "Well, oh, your parents are Ghanaian, right?" And I'm like, "No, they're from Georgia and Maryland." And he said, "So you're not Ghanaian?" And I said, I was born in the United States and raised there, and so were my parents." And then he said, "It's amazing." He said, "You look like my cousin from Cape Coast." And I kept hearing that for 2 years, until many years later, after having traveled to each corner of the African continent, I decided to get my ancestry thing done, because I didn't really trust those things. I went to 2 of them and came back that I was a big part of my ancestry is Ghanaian, the biggest part. And that blew me away. And then I called my friends who, I've stayed in touch with since I lived in Ghana, and I said, "You know what? I had my ancestry DNA done, and it said I'm Ghanaian." And they were like, "We've been telling you. You come from a clan in Cape Coast. There's a clan named Tompkins. That's your last name, and they live in Cape Coast. They're your people." And I couldn't even hear them when I was there. So now I'm going to go back. I have to return, because I have to go to Cape Coast and find that group of Ghanaians who are Fanti people, and that's my ancestry. And what I didn't also know is that all of the people who I had hired on my team and who I met were Fanti. And I didn't, in Ghana, that's what people do. They hire people, they work for people who are in their same ethnic group. And here I had done the same thing without even knowing it. So there's a lot more happening, for us as African people, and African people in the diaspora, and people of African ancestry, which is how I prefer to think of myself. Then we understand there's an organizing universe that makes sure that we're not broke, we don't get disconnected, even though we think we're different, we're not. Invite and request the president to make it a decade of return, because we need to not just come back once. We need to come back and explore how to become part of Ghana, in a way. Whether we move there, we're not going to all be able to do that. Whether we meet and bond with a Ghanaian family, you know what I'm saying? Whatever it is that we do, but we need to stay connected, and we don't need to just come in and try the jollof rice and the tilapia and then leave. We need to come, but we need to stay connected. And I think it's a wonderful thing, as an African American right now in this society and in the politics of race in this country, our hard work and our struggles have been marginalized, and they've been co-opted by the advances of other minorities who also have experienced various forms of oppression here, and they've used and relied upon, and justifiably so, the hard work of the African American civil rights movement and slavery, which has been the foundation of every social justice initiative in this country, to the point that we don't matter in that conversation of justice. The notion of reparations, these things that are things that we feel are important to us, our narrative stops at slavery. And so by creating a year of return, you take us back so that our narratives of ourselves can begin before slavery. And that is a blessing. You know what I mean? That is something that I think can change and save an African American life. Because if you think that you came from the worst possible scenario, then you see yourself as having to work from the bottom up. You know what I'm saying? But if your story begins before the bottom of the valley and starts at the top of the mountain, which is possible when you talk about what it means to be an African on the African continent, then it gives you a different kind of relationship to what you're facing right now. And that's why the year of return is so important, and why I wish it was a decade of return. Because it's going to take some of us a lot longer to understand what that means, and what it means in terms of the responsibility that we have as African Americans to the African continent, to Ghana, here in the US. You know, America's funny. I imagine, what if there was a year of return for America? Who would be the first group of people that are of American ancestry that the American government would invite back? I can tell you who it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be African Americans. It wouldn't be Liberians who are Africans who left. Do you know what I'm saying? It wouldn't be us. And I think that it is important, because it's one thing to know something, that you've lost something. Do you know what I'm saying? And so you miss it. But unfortunately, as each generation of African Americans go by, we don't even know what we've lost. So nothing's missing, and yet something terribly is missing. Do you get my point? And so by inviting us back, we get to set that straight. We get the accurate picture that, oh my God, there's much more that's missing that I never ever knew. And it begins to answer some of the questions within ourselves that we can't even frame. Do you know what I'm saying? Because then we feel that void that we never knew was a void. It was just always what it was. Does that make sense? So I think it's a critical thing. And you know, what it means to be a Ghanaian in Ghana, and I don't want to romanticize the reality of life in Africa for Africans, people. But we have so much more in common, you know, in regardless of where we stand in the world as people from the continent, than we have as differences. And we don't ever get to have that realization if we don't, you know, go back, if we don't return often, and with arms full and hearts open and ears wide and mouth shut, so we can listen and learn and share. So I think we need to learn to do that, and that's what returning. You know, one of my nieces is 14, and her parents, who are African American, have been sending her to Nairobi, to Kenya, to volunteer and to work with a Kenyan village of children. And she's been doing this, she earned the money, she's been going for maybe 4 years now. She's been teaching ballet because she studied ballet here. And so she's been teaching ballet to the young children in this village. And we would have to raise money to help her go. She's now 16. And so much of who she is as a young woman, do you know what I mean? The best parts of who she is have been formed through this experience of returning every year, do you know what I'm saying, to the continent, to give, to teach, to also learn, and to share. It's been amazing, and I'm so proud of her. Do you know what I'm saying? I can't, in a way that she may never understand, because I know that it's going to make her a better American and a better black woman in the world, and that she has a sense of herself that isn't defined by what this country says it means to be a black woman. She has a sense of connectedness that isn't defined by what this country says is the value of black women having relationships with and friendships with other black women. That would never happen if her parents hadn't seen the importance of her. And they had never been to the African continent, but they made it possible for her to go. And not on vacation or on tour to go on safari, do you know what I mean? But to actually go and be in and of the community. It was great. So, you know, that's why I can't say enough about why it's important, why it's valuable. You know, I think technology is a great enabler for black people, because today I have a small tech company and I have to always hire people, and I hire people through the internet from all around the world to help me with my design, with my graphics, with artistic stuff, with any number of things. And now I have the opportunity to hire young technical talent in Africa and in Ghana. I can go do that in a way that I would not be able to do and haven't been able to do before. So I'm excited because I can now make sure that when I am hiring and building the talent for my team, you know, I can actually make sure that my opportunity and my work is feeding and supporting and creating opportunity and relying upon the brilliance and the brain power and the creativity and innovation of African talent. And so I think we all have an opportunity to do that, particularly since so many African American women, for example, who own businesses in this country, who rely upon talent resources like Fiverr and other networks to hire people with skill sets. They can make a choice to hire those people, those coders and those programmers, et cetera, from the African continent. I watch a lot of YouTube channels, which creates commerce and industry, from people on the African continent. Because why? Because it's interesting. It gives me a different perspective. I can buy their products. I can go and buy shea butter. You know, I don't have to buy my shea butter from L'Oreal. I can go to 125th Street and buy it from someone who produced it in Ghana. Or I can buy it online from someone who's Ghanaian who has an online store. So I think that there are other ways that I can return and stay connected. And if we don't have an economic strategy that connects me to people on the continent, then I'm just talking. I'm not really serious, because it starts there. Because the reason I'm here and not there is economic. So the way I have to reconnect has to be economic, and not through any other hands but mine to yours and yours back to mine. That's how we build wealth on both continents. So I think that's really, really important, is to think about little things, you know, and little strategies that you can do to use your money in a way that lifts up and creates opportunity. My dollar goes so much further in terms of Ghana CDs. $300 here, which, you know, is dinner and a movie, is school fees for a family of children. I know that. So why wouldn't I look for an opportunity to spend that money here hiring and using